The grand hall of the Westbrook Community Center buzzed with excitement. Children in their best clothes sat nervously with their parents, waiting for their turn to perform in the annual youth piano competition. The air smelled of floor polish and coffee from the refreshment table in the corner. Alexander Devereaux adjusted his silk tie and checked his gold watch for the third time in 5 minutes. As the head judge and director of the prestigious Westbrook Conservatory, he considered judging these community competitions beneath him. But appearances mattered in the music world, and these events were good publicity for the conservatory. "How many more performances must we endure?" he whispered to his assistant, Lisa, who sat beside him with a clipboard. "Just 3 more, Mr. Devereaux," Lisa replied, keeping her voice low. "We're ahead of schedule." Alexander nodded and forced a polite smile as a nervous 10-year-old boy took the stage. The boy played a simple Mozart piece, making several mistakes that made Alexander wince. When the performance ended, Alexander offered mechanical praise and generic advice before assigning a score that guaranteed the child wouldn't advance to the regional competition. As the judges took a short break before the final contestants, Alexander wandered toward the back of the community center, seeking a moment of quiet. That's when he heard it, a melody drifting from one of the smaller practice rooms. Someone was playing Debussy's Clair de Lune, not with technical perfection but with a gentleness that made him stop in his tracks. Curious, he followed the sound. Through the small window in the door, he saw a woman in a gray uniform, clearly one of the cleaning staff, sitting at an old, upright piano. Her eyes were closed as her fingers moved across the keys. The music seemed to flow from her like water. Alexander frowned. The woman's posture was all wrong. Her fingering technique would have earned a failing grade at his conservatory. Yet there was something in the way she played that made him listen despite himself. The piece ended, and the woman opened her eyes. She noticed Alexander watching her through the window and quickly stood up, looking embarrassed. "I'm sorry," she said as Alexander opened the door. "I was just taking a short break. I'll get back to work right away." "You work here?" Alexander asked, looking at her uniform with the community center logo. "Yes, sir. 5 years now." She glanced nervously at the piano. "I hope it's okay that I use the piano. I always make sure my hands are clean first." "Do you have any formal training?" Alexander asked, ignoring her concern. "Not really," she replied. "I mean, my mother taught me when I was little." "Before she died?" Alexander nodded, his professional curiosity piqued. "I'm Alexander Devereaux, director of the Westbrook Conservatory." "I know who you are, sir," she said quietly. "I've seen your concerts." "I'm Mei Lin." Alexander raised an eyebrow, surprised that someone like her would attend his performances. He gestured toward the piano. "May I hear you play something else?" May hesitated, then nodded. She sat back down at the piano while Alexander leaned against the wall, arms crossed. She began to play a simple Chopin prelude. Alexander watched her hands, noting every technical flaw in her playing. When she finished, she looked up at him expectantly. "Your technique is atrocious," he said flatly. "Your wrists are too low, your fingering inconsistent, and your timing is all over the place." May's cheeks flushed, but she didn't look away. "I just play because I love it," she said. "I don't pretend to be a professional." "Love without discipline is wasted potential," Alexander replied. He was about to turn away when an idea struck him. His upcoming charity gala needed something to generate buzz and publicity. "You know," he said slowly, "I'm hosting a charity event next month at the conservatory. I think it might be educational for the attendees to see the difference between amateur enthusiasm and professional mastery." "I don't understand," May said, confusion clear on her face. "A piano duel," Alexander explained, warming to his idea. "You and me? It would make an interesting addition to the evening's entertainment." May shook her head. "I couldn't possibly." "I'll make a donation to the community center in your name," Alexander added, knowing this would be a compelling incentive. $10,000 regardless of the outcome. May's eyes widened. The community center had been struggling with budget cuts, and programs for disadvantaged children were at risk of being cut. Before she could respond, the door opened, and Lisa appeared. "Mr. Devereaux, the break is over. They're waiting for you." "I'll be right there," he said, not taking his eyes off May. "Well, what do you say?" By now a small crowd had gathered in the hallway, curious about what was keeping the famous pianist. Among them were several parents and children from the competition. "What's going on?" someone asked. Alexander turned to the small audience, suddenly inspired. "I've just issued a challenge to—" He gestured toward May. "May Lynn," she supplied quietly. "To Ms. Lynn here. A piano duel at my charity gala next month." Whispers spread through the group. A teenage girl pulled out her phone and started recording. "Is this some kind of joke?" one of the parents asked, looking between the well-dressed pianist and the woman in the cleaning uniform. "Not at all," Alexander replied smoothly. "I believe it will be educational for everyone to see the contrast between natural talent and professional training." The whispers grew louder. May stood frozen, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "She's just a janitor," someone murmured, loud enough for everyone to hear. Alexander saw May flinch at the words. For a brief moment he felt a twinge of discomfort, but he pushed it aside. This would be good publicity, and the donation would benefit the community center. Everyone would win. "Well, Miss Lynn?" he pressed. "Do you accept my challenge?" The hallway fell silent as everyone waited for her answer. May looked around at the curious faces, some sympathetic, others amused, as if the whole thing was a joke at her expense. "Yes," she said finally, her voice quiet but steady. "I accept." A buzz of excitement ran through the small crowd. Lisa was already typing notes on her tablet, no doubt planning how to incorporate this new element into the gala. "Excellent," Alexander said with a satisfied smile. "Lisa will get your information and send you the details." As he turned to leave, he heard someone ask May, "Do you really think you can compete with Alexander Devereaux?" He didn't hear her response, but it didn't matter. This wasn't about competition. It was about contrast, about showing his donors and students the difference between a hobbyist and a master, about reinforcing the value of the rigorous education his conservatory provided. What Alexander didn't notice as he walked away was the way May's hands trembled slightly, or how she took a deep breath to steady herself. He didn't see how she glanced at the old piano with a look of both fear and determination, and he certainly didn't know about the small, worn photograph she kept in her locker. A picture of a young girl in a concert dress standing next to a woman with kind eyes, both of them smiling in front of a grand piano on a stage much bigger than the one at the community center. As Alexander returned to the judges' table, Lisa leaned over to whisper, "Are you sure this is a good idea? She seems nice, and this could be embarrassing for her." "It's good publicity," he replied dismissively, "and the community center gets a donation. Everyone wins." "If you say so," Lisa said, unconvinced. For the rest of the competition, Alexander found himself distracted. He kept thinking about the way May had played Claire de Lune, technically flawed but somehow touching. It bothered him that he couldn't quite explain why her playing had caught his attention in the first place. Back in the small practice room, May sat alone at the piano, her fingers hovering over the keys without pressing them. The challenge she had accepted weighed heavily on her shoulders. It had been years since she had played for anyone other than herself and the occasional child who wandered into the room while she was on her break. She thought about calling her father to tell him what had happened, but decided against it. He would only worry. At 78, with his health declining, he had enough to concern him without adding her problems to the list. Instead, she gently pressed a key, listening to the single note resonate in the empty room. Then another and another until she was playing again. Not Debussy or Chopin this time, but a simple melody her mother had taught her long ago. As she played, May thought about Alexander Devereaux with his perfect suit and condescending smile. She thought about the whispers in the hallway, and the phones recording her embarrassment, and somewhere deep inside, beneath her anxiety and uncertainty, a small flame of determination began to burn. She didn't need to win any competition. She didn't need to impress anyone. But she would play her best, not to prove Alexander wrong, but to honor the music itself and the joy it had always brought her, even during the hardest times of her life. What neither May nor Alexander realized that afternoon was how completely their lives were about to change because of this chance encounter, and how a simple piano duel would reveal truths about music, about pride, and about the human heart that neither of them expected to discover. News of the piano duel spread quickly through the city's music circles. By the next morning, the video of Alexander challenging May had been shared hundreds of times online. Local arts blogs picked up the story, framing it as a real-life fairy tale, the janitor versus the maestro, Alexander sat in his spacious office at the conservatory, scrolling through the comments on his phone. The publicity was even better than he had anticipated. Ticket requests for the charity gala had doubled overnight. "We've had to change venues," Lisa told him, setting a cup of coffee on his desk. "The Henderson Hall wasn't going to be big enough. We've booked the Grand Symphony Hall instead." Alexander smiled. "Perfect. More seats mean more donations. People are really interested in this piano duel," Lisa said, hesitating slightly. "But some of the comments are a bit harsh. They're painting you as the villain." Alexander waved his hand dismissively. "Controversy sells tickets. Besides, they'll change their tune once they hear the difference between her playing and mine." Lisa didn't look convinced. "I spoke with Ms. Lin yesterday to get her details. She seems very sweet. She asked if she could practice on one of our pianos before the event, since the one at the community center is so old." "What did you tell her?" "I said I'd have to check with you." Alexander considered this for a moment. "Tell her she can use practice room C for 1 hour 3 days before the event." "That's more than generous." Lisa nodded and made a note on her tablet. "And what piece will you be playing for the duel?" Alexander leaned back in his chair. "Liszt's La Campanella. Nothing too show-offy, but technically challenging enough to make the point." "And Ms. Lin?" "I told her she could choose whatever she wants." He smiled. "I'm guessing it will be something simple. Maybe more Debussy." After Lisa left, Alexander turned to the grand piano in the corner of his office. He began his daily practice routine, starting with scales and exercises to warm up his fingers. He had been following the same regimen for 20 years. 2 hours of technical exercises in the morning, followed by 4 hours of repertoire work in the afternoon. As he played, his mind wandered to the woman in the gray uniform. There had been something about her playing that bothered him, something he couldn't quite identify. It wasn't just the technical flaws. He had heard plenty of amateurs play before. There was something else, something in the way the music had sounded coming from that old upright piano. Alexander shook his head, refocusing on his exercises. Whatever it was, it didn't matter. The duel would prove what he already knew, that years of rigorous training and discipline were what separated true artists from hobbyists. Across town, May was finishing her morning shift at the community center. She wiped down the last table in the cafeteria and checked her watch. She had 20 minutes before she needed to leave for her afternoon job at the nursing home. She hurried to the practice room where the old upright piano stood. Since accepting Alexander's challenge, she had been spending every spare moment here playing pieces she hadn't attempted in years. Her fingers felt stiff and clumsy at first, but day by day, the old skills were returning. May sat at the piano and placed her hands on the keys. She closed her eyes and began to play the piece she had chosen for the duel. It wasn't the most technically difficult composition, but it spoke to her heart, and that was what mattered. "That sounds beautiful." May's eyes snapped open. Mrs. Chen, the community center's director, stood in the doorway, smiling. "I didn't mean to interrupt," Mrs. Chen said. "I just wanted to thank you for what you're doing. The publicity from this event has already brought in several new donors for our after-school programs." May blushed. "I'm not doing it for publicity." "I know." Mrs. Chen sat on a folding chair near the piano. "You're doing it because someone challenged you and you're too stubborn to back down." May laughed. "Maybe a little. I've worked here for 15 years, Mrs. Chen said. And in all that time, I've never asked about your background. But I've heard you play when you thought no one was listening." She paused. "You weren't always a janitor, were you?" May's smile faded. She looked down at her hands, rough from years of cleaning, nails cut short for practical reasons. "That was another life," she said quietly. Mrs. Chen nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Well, whatever happened back then, I'm glad you're playing again now." She stood to leave. "And if you need time off to practice, just let me know." After Mrs. Chen left, May checked her watch again. She needed to go, but her fingers lingered on the keys. She thought about Alexander Devereux with his perfect technique and prestigious conservatory. Part of her wanted to back out of the challenge, to call Lisa and make some excuse. But a stronger part, a part she had almost forgotten existed, wanted to play, not to win, not to prove anything, but simply because music had once been her whole world, and she missed it. That evening, May arrived home to the small apartment she shared with her father. She found him sitting by the window looking through an old photo album. "You're late." he said, concern in his voice. Did something happen? No, ba, she replied, setting down her bag and kissing his cheek. Just stayed a little longer at the nursing home. Mr. Wilson wanted to finish his chess game. Her father nodded and turned back to the album. I was looking at these old pictures. Remember this one? May looked at the photograph her father was pointing to. A teenage girl in a formal dress standing next to a grand piano. The girl was smiling widely, holding a trophy. Shanghai Youth Piano Competition, May said softly. I was 16. You played Chopin, her father remembered. The judges said they had never heard it played with such feeling. May swallowed hard. That was a long time ago. Her father looked up at her, his eyes wise and gentle. I saw the video, May. The one with the famous pianist. May sighed. She should have known someone would show it to him. I'm sorry I didn't tell you. I didn't want you to worry. Worry? Her father laughed. I'm happy. My daughter's playing piano again. It's just one performance, May said, going to the kitchen to start dinner. And I'll probably embarrass myself. Her father followed her, moving slowly with his cane. You could never embarrass yourself when you play. He sat at the small kitchen table. Have you chosen your piece? May nodded as she began chopping vegetables. Chopin's Nocturne in C-sharp minor. Her father smiled. Your mother's favorite. I remember her playing it, May said. When I was very little, before she got sick. They fell into a comfortable silence, both lost in memories. After dinner, May helped her father to bed, then sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea. She spread her hands on the worn surface, fingers moving in the patterns of the nocturne. Without a piano at home, this was how she had practiced for years, in silence, with only the music in her mind. Meanwhile, across the city, Alexander was attending a dinner at the home of one of the conservatory's biggest donors. As dessert was being served, the conversation turned to the upcoming charity gala. I must say, Alexander, this piano duel of yours is quite intriguing, said the donor, a silver-haired woman with expensive jewelry. Everyone's talking about it. It's certainly generated interest, Alexander agreed. I watched the video, the woman continued. The poor girl looked terrified. Wasn't it a bit cruel to put her on the spot like that? Alexander shifted uncomfortably in his chair. It wasn't my intention to embarrass her. I simply thought it would be educational. Educational for whom? Asked another guest, a music critic Alexander had always found irritating. For your students to see you trounce someone with no formal training? How exactly is that educational? That's not, Alexander began, but the critic cut him off. I did some digging into this Mei Lin, the critic said. Did you know she volunteers to play for the residents at Oakwood Nursing Home? Apparently, she's been doing it for years. Doesn't charge a penny. Alexander didn't know what to say. He hadn't considered that May might play anywhere else besides the community center. Well, he said finally. That's very admirable of her. The conversation moved on, but Alexander remained distracted for the rest of the evening. On the drive home, he found himself thinking about Mei Lin again. There was more to her story than he had assumed, and for the first time he wondered if he had misjudged her. When he arrived home, Alexander went straight to his piano. Instead of his usual evening repertoire, he found himself playing Clair de Lune, the piece he had heard May playing when he first encountered her. He played it perfectly, with flawless technique, but somehow it didn't sound the same as when she had played it. Something was missing, though he couldn't quite identify what. Alexander frowned and started again from the beginning, trying to remember exactly how May's version had sounded. As his fingers moved across the keys, he began to realize that the upcoming duel might not be as straightforward as he had imagined. And for the first time in many years, Alexander Devereaux felt a flicker of uncertainty about his own playing. The night of the charity gala arrived with a buzz of excitement in the air. The Grand Symphony Hall glowed with soft lighting, and elegant flower arrangements adorned every corner. Well-dressed attendees filed in, their voices creating a gentle hum of anticipation as they found their seats. Backstage, Alexander adjusted his bow tie in the mirror of his private dressing room. He had performed in this hall dozens of times before, but tonight felt different. The sold-out crowd wasn't just here for the charity or to see him play. They were here for the duel, for the story that had captured the city's imagination. A knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. Come in, he called, straightening his already perfect posture. Lisa entered, tablet in hand as always. Everything's on schedule. The opening speeches will begin in 15 minutes, followed by the string quartet. Your performance is set for 8:30 and then—" She hesitated. "And then the duel." Alexander finished for her. "How is our challenger doing?" "Ms. Lin arrived about 20 minutes ago. She's in the second dressing room." Lisa paused. "She seems nervous. This is probably the biggest venue she's ever played in." Alexander nodded. "Did she take advantage of the practice time I offered her?" "Yes, she came in 3 days ago as arranged. She only stayed for 45 minutes, though. Said she had to get to her other job." Alexander raised an eyebrow. "Did anyone hear her practice? How did she sound?" Lisa shook her head. "I don't know. Professor Wu was supervising, but he didn't mention anything." She checked her watch. "I should go make sure everything else is running smoothly. Break a leg, Alexander." After Lisa left, Alexander found himself staring at his reflection again. The man who looked back at him was poised and confident, the picture of success. Yet something felt off tonight. He couldn't quite name the feeling, not quite nervousness, but a strange uneasiness that had been growing ever since he'd issued the challenge to May. Down the hall, in a smaller dressing room, May sat with her hands folded in her lap. She wore a simple black dress she had bought second-hand for the occasion. It wasn't fancy like the gowns she had seen women wearing in the lobby, but it was the best she could do. Her father sat across from her, looking distinguished despite his age in the old suit he wore only for special occasions. "Your mother would be so proud," he said, his eyes bright with emotion. "To see you on stage again." May managed a small smile. "I'm not sure she would be proud of me playing in a duel against someone like Alexander Devereaux. She always taught me that music was about sharing joy, not competition." "Then share joy tonight," her father said simply. "Forget about the duel. Forget about him. Play for her. Play for yourself." A gentle knock interrupted them. Lisa poked her head in. 10 minutes, Ms. Lin." After she left, May took a deep breath. "I should probably go find my place backstage." Her father stood slowly, leaning on his cane. "I'll go find my seat. Remember what I said?" May nodded and hugged him tightly before helping him to the door. As she watched him make his way slowly down the hall, she felt a wave of memories wash over her, of long-ago recitals, of her mother and father sitting in the front row, of the life she had once imagined for herself before everything changed. Out in the auditorium, the crowd settled into their seats as the lights dimmed. The president of the conservatory's board gave a welcoming speech, thanking everyone for their generous donations and explaining how the funds would support musical education for underprivileged children. He made no mention of the duel, but the anticipation in the room was palpable. The string quartet played beautifully, but there was a sense that the audience was simply waiting for the main event. When they finished their set and left the stage, a noticeable shift occurred in the energy of the room. Alexander walked onto the stage to enthusiastic applause. He bowed gracefully and sat at the gleaming grand piano, taking a moment to adjust the bench to his liking. Without any introduction, he began to play Liszt's La Campanella. His fingers flew across the keys with incredible precision. The piece was famously difficult, with rapid jumps and intricate passages that required perfect technique. Alexander played it flawlessly, showcasing years of disciplined practice and natural talent. The melody rang out like bells, clear and bright, as his hands moved with astonishing speed and accuracy. The audience watched in awe. Even those who had seen Alexander perform before seemed captivated by the technical brilliance of his playing. When he finished with a flourish, the hall erupted in applause. People rose to their feet, cheering and clapping as Alexander stood and bowed deeply. As the applause began to die down, Alexander remained standing. He raised his hands to quiet the audience. "Thank you," he said, his voice carrying throughout the hall. "Tonight is a special evening, not just because of your generous support for our music education programs, but because we have a unique opportunity to experience something different." He gestured toward the side of the stage. "I'd like to invite Ms. May Lin to join me for what we've been calling a piano duel, though perhaps it would be better described as a contrast in styles and approaches to music." The audience applauded politely as May walked onto the stage. She looked small in the vast space, her simple dress a stark contrast to Alexander's tailored tuxedo. Some people whispered behind their programs, no doubt discussing the story they had heard or seen online. May gave a shy bow and walked to the piano. Alexander stepped aside, moving to a chair positioned at the side of the stage where he would have a clear view of both May and the audience. As May sat at the piano, she seemed to take a moment to gather herself. She closed her eyes briefly, placed her hands on the keys, and took a deep breath. The first notes of Chopin's Nocturne in C-sharp minor filled the hall. The piece began softly, almost tentatively, like a gentle question being asked. Unlike Alexander's technically dazzling performance, May's playing was straightforward, without flash or unnecessary flourish. In the audience, some people exchanged glances. After the fireworks of Alexander's Liszt, this seemed almost too simple. But as May continued to play, something in the music began to change. Or perhaps it was something in the way people were listening. The Nocturne unfolded like a story being told in a language everyone suddenly understood. There was a raw, honest quality to May's playing that seemed to bypass technical considerations entirely. She wasn't just playing the notes, she was revealing something deeply personal through them. Backstage, Lisa watched on a monitor, surprised by what she was hearing. She had expected May to be nervous, to make mistakes under the pressure of such a prestigious venue and following Alexander's perfect performance. But while May's playing wasn't technically perfect, it had a quality that made technical perfection seem almost irrelevant. On stage, Alexander sat motionless in his chair. He had expected to feel satisfied as the audience recognized the difference between amateur and professional playing. Instead, he found himself drawn into the music in a way he hadn't anticipated. There was something in May's interpretation that caught him off guard, a vulnerability, and emotional depth that made his own performance feel suddenly hollow by comparison. As the piece progressed to its more passionate middle section, May's body swayed slightly with the music. Her face, which had been tense with concentration at first, softened. She wasn't performing for the audience anymore. She was simply playing as if she were alone with the piano. In the front row, May's father watched with tears in his eyes. Beside him sat Mrs. Chen from the community center, who had come to support May. She leaned over to whisper to him. "She plays just like her mother, doesn't she?" The elderly man nodded, unable to speak. Alexander couldn't take his eyes off May's hands. They weren't the hands of a concert pianist. They were rough from years of physical work, with short nails and none of the special care that professional musicians typically took with their hands. Yet they moved with a natural grace that spoke of an innate understanding of the music. As the Nocturne returned to its opening theme, now imbued with new meaning after the emotional journey of the middle section, a strange thing happened. Alexander felt a lump forming in his throat. The beauty of the moment caught him completely unprepared. He had heard this piece hundreds of times before, had even performed it himself, but he had never heard it quite like this. The final notes of the Nocturne hung in the air like a lingering question. For a moment, there was complete silence in the hall. That rare, perfect silence that happens when an audience is truly moved. Then, slowly at first but quickly building, applause filled the space. People stood up one by one until the entire audience was on their feet. The applause went on, punctuated by calls of bravo. From different corners of the hall, May looked stunned by the response. She stood and bowed awkwardly, her eyes seeking out her father in the front row. The applause continued as she bowed a second time, clearly unsure of what to do next. And then everyone noticed something unexpected. Alexander Devereux, the great maestro, the perfect technician, the man who had issued the challenge in the first place, was wiping tears from his eyes. The cameras that had been set up to record the event caught the moment perfectly. The humble woman in the simple dress standing by the piano, and the famous pianist openly weeping in response to what he had just heard. The moment Alexander's tears were captured on camera, something shifted in the Grand Symphony Hall. What had begun as a simple duel became something much more profound. The audience continued to applaud as May stood awkwardly by the piano, unsure of what to do next. Alexander rose from his chair, wiping his eyes quickly with a handkerchief from his pocket. He walked across the stage to stand beside May. The audience quieted, curious about what would happen next. This wasn't part of the program. "Ladies and gentlemen," Alexander said, his voice slightly unsteady. I believe we've all just witnessed something extraordinary." He turned to May, who looked up at him with wide, uncertain eyes. "Ms. Lin," he said loud enough for the microphones to pick up, "I owe you an apology. A murmur ran through the crowd. No one had expected this turn of events, least of all May herself. When I proposed this duel, Alexander continued, I did so with arrogance. I assumed that technical mastery was the only measure of musical ability worth considering. He paused, searching for the right words. What you just played wasn't just music. It was truth. May's cheeks flushed, but she held Alexander's gaze. Thank you, she said simply. The audience burst into another round of applause. As it died down, an older man in the front row struggled to his feet, leaning heavily on a cane. May's father. My daughter, he called out, his voice wavering with age but carrying clearly in the hushed hall. Learned to play from her mother, who was once a concert pianist in Shanghai. Before the accident that took her hands, he held up his own hands, gnarled with arthritis. When we came to this country, we had nothing. But my wife taught May everything she knew, not just the notes but the heart of music. May looked at her father, tears now streaming down her face. This was a story they rarely shared, a past they had learned to live with in private. My wife always said, the old man continued, that many can play the piano but few can make it sing. My daughter makes it sing. He bowed slightly toward Alexander. As do you, sir, in your own way. Alexander nodded, visibly moved. He turned back to the audience. I think we've all learned something valuable tonight. I know I have. He gestured to May. Let's show our appreciation once more for Ms. Mei Lin. The applause that followed was thunderous. People stood, cheered, some even dabbed at their eyes. It was no longer about the novelty of a janitor playing against a maestro. It was about the music itself, and what it could express when played with genuine feeling. As they left the stage together, Alexander turned to May. Would you join me for a moment? I'd like to speak with you privately. May nodded, still overwhelmed by what had just happened. She glanced back toward where her father stood. I need to check on my father first. Of course, Alexander said. I'll wait for you in the green room. May hurried to her father, who was now surrounded by several well-wishers, including Mrs. Chen. Ba, are you okay? She asked, taking his arm. He smiled at her, his eyes bright with pride. I'm better than okay. Your mother would be so proud, Mrs. Chen stepped in. I'll make sure he gets home safely. You should enjoy your moment. May hesitated, but her father patted her hand. Go, he said. This is your night. With a quick hug, May left them and made her way backstage to the green room. She found Alexander sitting alone, staring thoughtfully at a glass of water in his hands. You wanted to speak with me? She said, standing just inside the doorway. Alexander looked up. Without the stage lights in the audience, he seemed smaller somehow, more human. Please sit down, he said, gesturing to a chair across from him. May sat, smoothing her simple dress nervously. I meant what I said out there, Alexander began. I do owe you an apology. When I heard you playing at the community center, I made assumptions based on nothing but my own prejudice. It's okay, May said quietly. You weren't entirely wrong. My technique isn't perfect. I haven't had formal training since I was a teenager. Technique can be taught, Alexander said. What you have, that connection, that ability to speak directly to the heart through music, that's much rarer. He leaned forward. Your father mentioned your mother was a concert pianist? Me nodded. She was quite famous in China. She was touring in Europe when a car accident damaged both her hands. She could still play a little, but never professionally again. May looked down at her own hands. She taught me everything. When we came to America, she gave piano lessons from our apartment to help with bills. And you? Did you study music formally? For a while, May said. I was at the Shanghai Conservatory when my mother got sick. Cancer. She swallowed hard. I came home to take care of her. After she died, my father's health started failing too. There was never enough money for me to go back to school. Alexander nodded slowly, understanding filling his eyes. So you took whatever jobs you could find. The community center was the best, May said with a small smile. They let me play the piano during my breaks. A knock at the door interrupted them. Lisa poked her head in. I'm sorry, Alexander, but people are asking for you at the reception, and the press wants photos of both of you together. Alexander sighed. Tell them we'll be there shortly. After Lisa left, he turned back to May. Before we go back out there, I wanted to ask you something. Would you consider teaching at the conservatory? May stared at him, sure she had misheard. Teaching, me? As a special instructor, Alexander clarified. Not for technical skills, but for musical interpretation, emotional expression. The things that can't be taught through drills and exercises. But I don't have a degree. Or any qualifications. After what everyone heard tonight, no one will question your qualifications, Alexander said firmly. Besides, I'm the director. I get to decide who teaches at my school. May shook her head in disbelief. I don't know what to say. Say yes, Alexander urged. We need someone like you. I need someone like you. He looked away, suddenly vulnerable. I've spent my whole life pursuing technical perfection. Tonight I realized that somewhere along the way I lost something essential. My playing is technically flawless, but it doesn't move people the way yours does. May was quiet for a long moment. I still have to take care of my father, she said finally. And I can't just leave my jobs at the community center and the nursing home. The people there depend on me. We can work around your schedule, Alexander assured her. Part-time to start, and... He hesitated, then continued. I was thinking the conservatory could establish a permanent endowment for the community center's music program. With you as the director. May's eyes widened. You would do that? It's the least I can do, Alexander said. Music should be for everyone, not just those who can afford expensive training. He stood up and extended his hand. So, do we have a deal? May stood as well, looking at his outstretched hand. Instead of shaking it, she surprised both of them by giving him a quick hug. Thank you, she whispered. Alexander, momentarily startled, smiled and nodded. No, thank you, for reminding me what music is really about. Together, they walked back into the reception area, where photographers immediately surrounded them, cameras flashing. Someone thrust a glass of champagne into May's hand. A reporter asked her how it felt to beat Alexander Devereaux at his own game. There was no winner or loser tonight, May said, looking at Alexander. Just two people sharing their love of music in different ways. Alexander nodded in agreement. The only winner tonight was the music itself, he added. As the evening continued, May found herself introduced to countless people whose names she couldn't possibly remember. Conservatory board members, wealthy donors, music critics, and fellow musicians all wanted to meet the woman who had moved Alexander Devereaux to tears. Through it all, she kept glancing back at her father, who sat in a comfortable chair in the corner, beaming with pride as he watched his daughter finally receiving the recognition she deserved. Late in the evening, when the crowd had thinned somewhat, May found herself standing next to Alexander at the edge of the room. Overwhelming, isn't it? He said quietly. Very, she admitted. I'm not used to this kind of attention. You'll have to get used to it, he said with a smile. After tonight, everyone will want to hear you play. May shook her head. I don't think I want to perform professionally. Teaching, though. That feels right. Alexander nodded thoughtfully. You know, my first teacher used to say that teaching is the highest form of musicianship. It's not just about preserving the art form. It's about helping others find their own voice. He looked at her with newfound respect. I think you'll be wonderful at it. As the night drew to a close, May helped her tired father to his feet. As they made their way slowly toward the exit, several people stopped them to express their admiration. You raised an extraordinary daughter, one elderly board member told May's father. The old man smiled. She raised herself, he said proudly. I just got out of her way. Outside, Alexander had arranged for a car to take them home. As May helped her father into the back seat, Alexander approached with a small envelope. The donation for the community center, he explained, handing it to her, as promised. Though after tonight, I think we'll need to increase the amount. May took the envelope with a grateful nod. This will help so many children, she said. That's the idea, Alexander replied. Music changed my life. It should have the chance to change others too. As the car pulled away, May looked back to see Alexander standing on the steps of the Grand Symphony Hall, a solitary figure against the grand architecture. For a man who had everything, she thought he had seemed strangely lost until tonight. Perhaps they had both found something they needed. 3 months after the charity gala, May stood in front of a small classroom at the Westbrook Conservatory. 6 students sat before her, each with varying expressions of curiosity and uncertainty on their faces. These were Alexander's most promising students, handpicked for what he had called a special workshop in musical expression. Before we begin, May said, her voice soft but clear, I want you to know that I'm not here to change how you play. You all have wonderful technique. I've heard your recordings, she smiled. What we're going to explore together is something beneath the notes. A young woman with perfectly manicured nails raised her hand. Professor Devereaux says you're going to teach us how to play with more feeling. But isn't that subjective? How do you teach something like that? It was a fair question, one that May had asked herself many times while preparing for this class. You're right, she acknowledged. It is subjective, and I don't have a formula or a set of exercises that will magically make your playing more emotional. She walked to the piano in the center of the room, but I do have questions that might help you discover what's already inside you. May sat at the piano and played a simple C major scale. What do you hear? She asked. The students looked at each other, confused. A C major scale, one young man said finally, as if it were obvious. May nodded. Yes. Now close your eyes. She played the scale again, this time with a gentleness that made the simple progression sound like the beginning of something beautiful. What do you hear now? There was a moment of silence. It sounds like, morning, said a quiet boy in the back, like the start of a day. Good, May said encouragingly. She played the scale once more, this time with a different touch that gave it a melancholy quality. And now? Like someone walking away, said another student. Like goodbye, May smiled. Exactly. The notes didn't change, but the meaning did. That's what we're going to explore together. For the next hour, May worked with each student individually, asking them not about fingering or tempo, but about the stories behind their music. What did they see when they played? What were they trying to say? For some, the questions were uncomfortable. They had never thought about music this way. For others, it was like a door opening to a room they had always wanted to enter. When the class ended, the students left chatting excitedly among themselves. May gathered her notes, feeling a mix of exhaustion and satisfaction. Teaching was challenging in ways she hadn't expected, but also rewarding beyond what she had imagined. As she prepared to leave, she noticed Alexander standing in the doorway. He had been observing the class. That was quite something, he said, walking into the room. I've been trying to get Thomas to play with genuine feeling for 2 years. You managed it in 1 hour. May laughed. I didn't do anything special. I just asked him what he was afraid of. And what did he say? That he was afraid of playing wrong notes. May shrugged. So I told him to play wrong notes on purpose, as many as he could, until he wasn't afraid anymore. Alexander shook his head, smiling. Completely contrary to everything I've taught. And yet it worked. He sat on the piano bench, running his fingers lightly over the keys without pressing them. How are things at the community center? Wonderful, May said, her face lighting up. The new pianos arrived last week. You should see the children's faces when they play on them. They can't believe the difference in sound. The endowment Alexander had established was already transforming the community center's music program. New instruments, sheet music, even a part-time assistant for May, all making it possible to reach more children who otherwise would never have access to music education. And your father? Alexander asked. How is he adjusting to the new apartment? This had been another change in May's life since the gala. With her new salary from the conservatory and the community center, she had been able to move her father to a ground-floor apartment with better access for his mobility issues. He loves it, May said, especially the small patio where he can sit outside. And it's closer to the nursing home, so I can visit more often. She still played for the residents at Oakwood Nursing Home every Sunday afternoon. No matter how busy her schedule became, she refused to give that up. Some of the residents had no other visitors, and their joy in the music was too precious to abandon. I wanted to ask you something, Alexander said, interrupting her thoughts. He seemed uncharacteristically hesitant. The conservatory's winter showcase is coming up next month. Would you consider performing? May looked surprised. Me? But that's for the faculty and top students. You are faculty now, Alexander reminded her, and there's been quite a demand to hear you play again. The video from the gala has over 2 million views online. May still found that fact hard to believe. The day after the gala, someone had posted the video of her performance and Alexander's tearful reaction. It had spread quickly, drawing comments from around the world. Many people wrote that they had been moved to tears themselves or inspired to return to playing music they had abandoned. I don't know, May said uncertainly. I'm comfortable teaching, but performing is different. Just think about it, Alexander said. No pressure. He stood up from the bench. By the way, I'm hosting a small dinner at my home this weekend for some of the faculty. I'd be honored if you and your father would attend. May nodded. I'd like that. Thank you. After Alexander left, May sat at the piano thinking about how much had changed in such a short time. 3 months ago, she had been scrubbing floors and playing piano only on her breaks. Now she was teaching at the prestigious Westbrook Conservatory, directing an expanded music program at the community center, and being invited to faculty dinners at the director's home. And yet some things hadn't changed at all. She still felt most herself when she was simply playing, letting the music speak through her without worrying about who was listening or what they might think. That evening, May told her father about Alexander's invitation to perform in the showcase. You should do it, her father said immediately, his eyes bright with excitement. I don't know, May said, stirring her tea. It feels strange going from being a janitor to suddenly performing on stage. Her father reached across the table and took her hand. You were never just a janitor, May. You were always a musician. The rest of the world is finally seeing what I've always known. The next day, May arrived early at the conservatory to practice before her class. As she walked down the hallway toward the practice rooms, she heard music coming from Alexander's office. She paused outside the door, listening. He was playing the Chopin Nocturne, the same piece she had performed at the gala. But something was different about his playing. The technical perfection was still there, every note precisely where it should be. But there was a new quality too, a vulnerability that hadn't been present before. May stood quietly, not wanting to interrupt. When Alexander finished the piece, she heard him sigh, then begin again from the start. This time he played even more expressively, as if he were having a conversation with the music itself. Without thinking, May knocked softly on the door. Come in, Alexander called. May opened the door. I'm sorry to interrupt. I was just passing by and heard you playing. Alexander looked slightly embarrassed. I've been working on this piece for weeks now, trying to understand what makes your interpretation so moving. He gestured toward the piano. Would you play it again for me? Just the middle section? May hesitated, then nodded and sat beside him on the bench. She played the passionate middle section of the nocturne, the part where the music builds in emotion before returning to the opening theme. There, Alexander said when she finished. That's what I can't quite capture. It's like you're not afraid to let the music take over completely. Maybe that's it, May said thoughtfully. I'm not afraid of the feeling. When my mother was teaching me, she always said that the composer wrote the notes, but the pianist has to supply the emotion, and emotions are messy sometimes. Alexander nodded slowly. I spent so many years focusing on playing every note perfectly that I forgot why those notes were written in the first place. It's never too late to remember, May said gently. 2 weeks later, May officially accepted the invitation to perform at the winter showcase. In the days leading up to the event, she practiced when she could, but also continued with her teaching and her work at the community center. The night of the showcase, the conservatory's concert hall was filled with students, parents, and music lovers from throughout the city. Backstage, May felt a flutter of nerves as she waited for her turn to perform. Alexander found her there, pacing quietly. Nervous? He asked. A little, she admitted. It's been a long time since I performed in a proper concert. You're going to be wonderful, he assured her. Just play the way you did that first day I heard you at the community center, like you're playing for yourself, not for an audience. May smiled gratefully. I'll try. When her name was announced, May walked onto the stage to warm applause. She had chosen to play a piece by Rachmaninoff, more technically challenging than what she had played at the gala. As she sat at the piano, she saw her father in the front row, beaming with pride. Beside him sat Mrs. Chen and several of the children from the community center program. In the moment before she began to play, May thought about her journey, from the little girl practicing scales under her mother's watchful eye, to the teenager with dreams of concert stages, to the woman who had set aside those dreams to care for her family, finding joy in playing whenever and wherever she could. And then she thought of Alexander, whose tears had reminded everyone, including himself,